It's just afternoon, the 3rd of June. Welcome back to Connect Creek. Ross Davies here with you on this 19-degree Wednesday afternoon, and today we'll take you on our Brook Learning program, which is targeted primarily at intermediate students, and there's a contradiction of terms right there. So you're looking at mainly grade 4 to 7 and possibly high school as well. We're going to be doing a few activities. We'll test the water in the creek, interpret the results. We will do the same by testing for live aquatic invertebrates. We'll take a little peek at the hatchery as well. So when you arrive in the parking lot right over there, there's a couple of outhouses that don't flush. We have 2 more up at the center that do. So something to keep in mind. And we will get right underway. Well, the first thing we'd measure is temperature of the air, temperature of the water. Here it is, June, almost summer, and you should see a fairly significant difference between the two, especially in the afternoon, which tells you there's a decent section of riparian cover along both sides of the creek. You got gold panning of all things, so I'll let you know if we hit the mother lode. So air temperature today, I mentioned it was 19, and you want to stick your thermometer in the water. Anywhere that the water's moving will do. So that's been down there for a couple minutes. We'll take a look. We are at plus 12, and if you're a coho salmon or cutthroat trout, that acceptable range is about from 0 in the winter up to around 21 or so in the summer. These are cold-blooded fish. They can't take water that's 25, 30, you know, the way a catfish or a sunfish or something like that could do. So if you're, the rule of thumb, I know you don't carry your pocket thermometer everywhere you go, but if you're in the river or the lake and it doesn't feel like you need to come out every once in a while, chances are the water's too warm for salmon or trout. But at 12 today, that is really exactly where we'd like it to be. Second test we're doing is something called pH today, and anyone who's ever assisted their teacher with the salmonas in the classroom tank knows what we're talking about here. It's a measurement of how much hydrogen ions are in the water. You've got a logarithmic scale, you can look that up, that goes from 0 to 14. 0 to 7 is what we call acidic. The lower the number, the more acidic it is. And 7 up to 14 is alkaline. The higher the number, the more alkaline it is. Let's think of things that are acidic, like lemon juice, vinegar down around 3, alkaline stuff, cement powder is up there around 12 or 13, we all know that. Most tap water is neutral, right smack in the middle at 7. If you're a salmon, the old rhyme is 6 to 8, and life is great. So all we're going to do, we've taken our creek water already, and we've put it in this test tube, up to the 10 mil line, right about where my fingernail is, and we're going to add 10 drops of this iodine solution, and you don't drink it. So here we go. Oh, missed the last one. There it is. So all we have to do, put that on there, give it a really vigorous shake. Now if there happens to be a major earthquake right at this moment, you can skip this step. So we're just going to slap it into this little guy, and you match up the number with the color, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is your pH. Today you can see the pH is 7.0, right on the money. So temperature is good and pH is good as well. So we're going to take a little wander just back over to the creek here to show you about another measurement that we consider, and that's known as turbidity, and all that basically means is the amount of light that can penetrate down through the water. The muddier the water, the less light gets through, the higher the turbidity. And the way we measure that, to be simple, is just with a meter stick. How far can we see? So if you can see right to the bottom like we can today, that water is crystal clear. That means turbidity level is 0. There isn't any. So how can that affect salmon or trout? A number of things. You are a salmon, you feed by sight. You look for your food, the water's muddy, you can't see the insects you're after. You're going to starve to death. It can mess up your gills, you can't breathe properly. And if you're trying to spawn in the fall time, early winter, you cannot move the rocks or the gravel. So turbidity is good, temperature is good, pH is good. Now a little riddle here, put this in your thinking cap for later this afternoon. What if someone had drained a swimming pool last night and some toxic chlorinated water came downstream, and by the time we get here, it's gone and the water chemistry is perfect? how would we know that it even happened? More on that later. Let's talk substrate while we're down here. And that just means the bottom of the stream. The rocks, the gravel, the cobbles. And let's get into that right now. Gravel, well, we've all driven on a gravel road. And that's your small stuff like this. And what's it used for? Well, for spawning. Anything from about 2 centimeters right on up to 8 or 9. So cobble's sort of in between. We're zooming in on some right now. And you think of a cobblestone street, it's like the size of a brick. So some cobbles are great for harboring food in items like insects that salmon eat. Others, larger species of salmon like Chinook will spawn with cobbles. We don't really get Chinook spawning in Kanaka, the odd one, but not too many. Then you've got the big guys, the boulders. And I wonder how young salmon make use of boulders. Well, look at where the flow is going through. You can picture if we had high water here, there's a place behind that boulder to hide, and it's handy for hiding from predators too. We can talk about fallen trees. There's one there. And the question is, tree falls in the creek, do we haul it away or do we leave it? Well, there's your answer. If I'm being chased by a heron and I'm 10 centimeters long, I know where I'm going. So within reason, we leave them in any chance we get. It's different types of habitat. There's no pools here. When you talk about a pool in a creek, you're talking slow and deep. Further down in the canyon, there's lots of large pools, and the coho salmon find them really handy to hold in while they're waiting to spawn in November and December. But here is what we call a riffle. It's shallow, it's wide, and it's bumpy. And we didn't measure oxygen today, but this is how, for the most part, the oxygen gets into the water. Through riffles, going over rocks, those bubbles are getting forced down. So that's a riffle, and it's not to be confused with that. pH, as we found before, the pH was 7, which is right on the money, right neutral. In the winter, early spring, it tends to be lower than that, 6.5, sometimes 6. And that's a little acidic, right? So I'm wondering why that is. Well, we get a lot of rain around here in the winter, early into spring, and this rainwater is kind of acidic, and it lowers the pH. Now there's another factor right above us. Coniferous forests are acidic by nature. So you take a bunch of these pH valves, stick them in a container with some water for about a week, you'll get a really crazy pH down around 4.5 or something like that. It's not enough to hurt anything, but it does slightly affect the pH level in the creek. We've got a whole collection of habitat here at the Kanaka Creek Watershed Stewardship Center. We've been down on the main creek today already, but have a look at this. It's a little, we call the Chum Channel, a little meandering off-channel area here that never floods, so it's really safe for young salmon and trout, and they come in here to find food. We can take a wander around the corner here and look at what's called as Pond 3. It used to be one of the hatchery rearing ponds, but not anymore. It was left to go natural, and it supports young fish all year round. So it's just quiet, off-channel pond habitat that coho juveniles really, really like. Just looking up towards the Stewardship Center. But the place we're going to explore today is this pond right down here. We're all set up, we're ready to go, and we'll just kind of show you what we do here. We take one of these little guys and just take a little scoop around where the plants are, kind of like so. And what we're going to do is just bring it over to the bench here, and we'll see what we've got. So there's some rapid movement in there. There's a couple little mayfly larvae. More on that in a second. I've got a pond snail in here, but oh, here's a treat. In this one, let's try to get them to move around a bit. There's some Pacific chorus frog tadpoles that came out of the main pond. We'll take a look at the adult. Right there. That one's got a white throat, so that'd be a female. The males have a black throat, and only the males croak. And just a little bit of trivia here. That ribbit, ribbit, ribbit sound in evening movie scenes in Hollywood, that's the voice of our Pacific chorus frog. They're an international movie star. So we found mayflies, pond snail, chorus frogs. Glad to see the chorus frogs are still in here. What does that mean? Well, we can look at our chart and look at the categories in green. There's your mayfly. That means they are not tolerant of water pollution. If there's polluted water, they'll die. In the middle are dragonflies, things like that. There's your backswimmer. And they're kind of half and half. They can handle a little bit of low oxygen, high temperatures, they're all right. These guys at the bottom, we all know about those, could almost live in an outhouse. So if all you find is the red category, you could be in a situation where Houston, we've got a problem. But since we found mayflies, we know this water's in pretty good shape. And it's been like that for a long time. And that goes back to our original question, is how would we know if someone drained a swimming pool? Well, if that pool water had come through here, there wouldn't be any mayflies, there wouldn't be any chorus frogs, or there wouldn't really be much of anything, to tell you the truth. So that answers that little question from before. So just to wrap up the first two parts of this Brook Learning program today, there's two ways to measure stream health. One is by directly measuring things like temperature, pH, oxygen, if you like. That tells you what's happening right now in real time. But the better way is to have a look at what's living here, because that will tell you what's been going on over time, for a long time. And just keep in mind too, is if you want a healthy watershed, you need different kinds of habitats. Can salmon live in here all year round? No, probably not. Probably the oxygen gets too low in the summer. But you won't find chorus frog tadpoles out in the main part of Kanaka. So you've got to have a nice mixed bag for everybody. We're at the George Ross Learning Room, and on a Brook Learning program, or many programs, this is kind of where recess or lunch would be. Of course, right now we're kind of locked down for COVID, but if the weather was inclement, we could be in there. We could watch a nature video. We could look at what we've discovered down there. On a day like today, we'd be out here on the amphitheater having a snack or whatever. And then we're going to take a look at that place, at the Bell Irving Hatchery. A little history. It all started in 1982, and you got this bench over here that a fellow by the name of Cecil Tays. He was just something like 90 years old and rebuilt it himself. Pretty incredible. Started in an old sheep barn, and the park people of the day said to GVRD, which is now Metro, of course, can we raise salmon in your barn? And they said, fill your boats, and the rest is history. But about 2009, 2010, we found out that you have troughs full of water inside a building that's not supposed to have water in it. Things like mold and mildew happen. So about that time, somebody from staff walked in with a mold meter. The needle went off the end of the scale. They had a mini heart attack, and the building was condemned. So this was rebuilt in 2013, and that came 3 years later. So we have right now in June, all we have on hand are these little guys right in there. Those are coho salmon fry. It's a little hard to see through the screen, really. You might be able to see them darting about in there. And they're destined to be here until next year. The coho have a freshwater life cycle of about 1.5 years before they head to the ocean. So sometime this summer, it will get moved from there out to these ponds, and simply because they outgrow the tanks that they're in right now. Now, a portion of these fry usually go to other watersheds, but this year we've got restrictions on that sorts of thing due to COVID-19, so all of the coho fry to be released this year will all go into Kanaka. So a little bit of a shot in the arm for Kanaka. What are these funny looking things? They're dry right now, but in the late fall, those are home to coho salmon adults that are waiting to spawn. We mentioned the pools down in the lower canyon. We're just trying to imitate that with these things here. The eggs will incubate in there during the winter. And sometimes we explain, once again, the difference between a hatchery and a fish farm. Well, a fish farm is for feeding people, which is great, but this is for feeding nature. We're not intending to replace all the wild salmon, far from it. We're taking maybe 5% of the returning fish from the 240th fish fence, and a little interesting fact there, no salmon has ever made it to this facility on his or her own ever. They all arrive here in a truck, in a tank in the back of that truck, because Cliff Falls is in the way. They can't get up there, but they can get down the falls. So of course right now it's getting on almost summer, no spawning salmon to be had. So we've come up with these things just to show you. in that incubation room we just saw a minute ago, there's two types of incubators. There's our pseudo eggs there. This is called a Heath tray. You can put about 5,000 eggs in one of these things. Maybe a little more for a column incubator. And all that's trying to imitate is this, with water percolating up through the gravel. So we'll take you on a little virtual trip here of how it all comes to be. This is in the fall. Those are chum salmon hanging on the bleed rack, getting rid of the blood so it won't let fungus grow on the eggs, which you can see right here. And if you came in October or November, maybe, you might actually see this for real. Of course, the eggs came out, they're not alive, and they're not dead. This has to happen. In nature, it looks more like this. That foam means, guys, we just got born, we're alive. Female buries them, and by the time January rolls around, they've got their eyes. And since we can't see the coho in the ponds, they've already left. They looked rather like this. And as we take a look down through the habitat, that's our Brook Learning program. Hopefully you get to do it for real one of these days. So, from the Stewardship Center, Ross Davies saying so long.